Alright, let's do this. Welcome back, or unless it's your first time, my name is Josh, and today we'll be talking about the Minolta XG7. In 1977, Minolta released two lines of small-bodied SLR cameras, the XD and the XG. The XD was the top-of-the-line model meant to bridge the gap between amateur and professional photographers, while the XG was the lower-end line meant specifically for amateur photographers. The first models of these two lines were the XD11 and this little guy right here, the XG7. You may also know it by a different name, the XGE in Japan or the XG2 in Europe. These cameras came equipped with aperture priority auto exposure and smaller, lighter bodies when compared to the Minolta SRTs, which were available at the time. That made them perfect for the ever-mobile amateur photographer of the late 1970s. This camera comes equipped with an MD mount and a center-weighted CDS cell exposure meter. CDS just stands for cadmium sulfide. CDS meters became common in the 1960s, replacing selenium cells, which required a larger light gathering area. The one drawback, though, was that while selenium cells could generate their own electricity, CDS meters would require a battery. And on top of that, CDS meters are particularly power hungry, so a lot of these cameras would come with an on-off switch to turn off the meter circuit and conserve battery life. This camera comes with an electromagnetic shutter release button that activates an exposure meter only when it comes in contact with your skin. And when you're in aperture priority mode and you do that, you would get an LED readout of the shutter speed on the right side of the viewfinder. The XG7 comes with a horizontal traverse cloth focal plane shutter with speeds from 1 second to 1/1000th of a second, as well as flash sync at 1/60th of a second, bulb mode for all your long exposures, and an exposure compensation switch of 2 stops. It also comes with a PM-type focusing screen with a horizontal biprism surrounded by a microprism band for easier focusing. It also comes with an electronic self-timer which will count down 10 seconds using the red LED battery check light on the front of the body. And it has a cable shutter release socket which isn't on the shutter release button but is actually on the side of the lens mount. It also comes with a hot shoe on top for all of your flash needs, and if you want to power the light meter, you're going to need 2 LR or SR44 batteries. So that about does it for the basics. Now I want to get into some of the things that I like and some of the things I don't like. But first, let's talk about the things that I do like. So the first thing I want to mention is the weight and feel of this camera. This is probably the lightest SLR that I have. And I got pretty small hands, so the small size doesn't affect me. It feels great in my hands. I'm very comfortable holding it. Despite its small size, it feels particularly sturdy. In addition to that, I do love using the aperture priority mode on this camera. It's not something I love doing all the time, but this is the one camera where I pretty much never take it out of aperture priority mode. Plain and simply, I just love the images I get out of this camera, and that's mostly, due to the 50mm f1.7 Minolta lens that I have on it, but it's also due to the CDS metering system that's inside here. The metering system is just on point. Everything looks very balanced, and I barely have to lift a finger. I also really love the focusing on this. I feel like I nail focus more often than not with this camera. It just feels very natural lining up the biprism. It's very smooth, and not much else to say about that. The focusing is great. This is also I guess kind of a minor thing, but I love the shutter sound on this camera. Even though it's an electronic camera, it has one of the better shutter slap sounds. Here, let's hear it. Not bad, right? Overall, really sturdy, really dependable, and those are the things that I like about it. Unfortunately, it's not a perfect camera, so let's talk about the things that I dislike. So I want to want to start with a major one. This camera can be shot manually. However, the metering display is inactive when you are in manual mode. You can only see the meter when you are in aperture priority mode. So that makes making use of the manual shutter speeds a much more difficult process. Essentially, if I want to use the manual shutter speeds, I have to put it into aperture priority mode, take a meter reading without firing the shutter, switch it to the recommended shutter speed, and then take the photo that way. Which, I mean, it may sound stupid to some of you out there, but it just doesn't make sense to me that I wouldn't be able to see what the meter is reading if I'm in manual mode. Like on my Nikon FG, I could see what the meter is reading, and I could read what my shutter speed is, and then I could just match the two. It seems like it should be simple, but yeah, Minolta did not do that here. On top of that, I would have liked to have seen some more features. This isn't really a huge complaint because this camera was intended for the amateur photographer on the go. But, you know, shutter speed of 1/2000th would have been nice. I do find myself in rather sunny locations and can use that extra stop while keeping my my f-stop as open as I can, as I want it. Also, no shutter priority mode, which isn't a huge deal. I probably wouldn't use it that much, but it's the thought that counts. One thing that I do like and don't like is the sort of touch-activated meter on the shutter button itself. It activates with the touch of your finger, and this is kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. I've never seen that on a camera before, but now that winter is upon us, I have found myself going outside in colder temperatures and wanting to wear gloves. You could probably see where I'm going with this. If I'm wearing gloves, the meter doesn't read because it's not feeling my skin, and I cannot fire the camera unless I have bare skin on the actual sensor. Very confusing, very annoying, and definitely not a winter-friendly or glove-friendly design by Minolta. And something I should mention is that it has an on-off switch. And I found myself wondering why it was there, because I figured that the meter was inactive, you know, the whole time unless someone was touching the shutter release button and, you know, completing the circuit. But I have also found myself accidentally leaving the camera on, putting it in my bag or putting it away for a month at a time, coming back, and the batteries are completely dead. But I'm wondering why the batteries are running at all if nothing is activating the meter. So that's one thing to note out there. If you are getting this camera and you do load it with batteries, try to remember to turn it off after every use. Really get in the habit. I've had to get in that habit, and it can be a bit of a nuisance because sometimes a couple weeks will go by and I'll pick it up and realize I didn't turn it off the last time I used it. One other complaint is that in the viewfinder, the LED readout is really convenient. Really love it that it lights up, but the numbers next to the shining LED are black. So in any dimly lit scenario, I can't even really see what shutter speed I'm actually shooting at, which is fine if I want to just trust the camera to do what it does. But if I'm shooting slower than 1/30th of a second or even 1/60th of a second, I run the risk of getting a little bit of camera shake and motion blur, and those are some things that I might not want. So yeah, viewing the actual shutter speeds in the viewfinder can be a bit tricky in dimly lit situations. And just to go back and reiterate, this camera doesn't work without a battery. One of the nice things about shooting a fully mechanical camera is that you very often don't have to worry about that. Generally, in a mechanical camera, the battery is just running the meter, and you can shoot without a meter, you know, if you have an external one anyway, or you just want to go with your gut. But this one will not fire unless you have a battery in it. And that being said, if you are out in the field and your battery dies, you have no way of shooting the camera. So I basically live in fear every time I'm using this bad boy. This next thing might just be a gripe with this particular camera. It might be something that does work in others, but the self-timer is not very clear that it's been activated. You know how on most SLRs you kind of have the winder that you wind back, and when you hit the shutter button, you get that buzz, that shh, you know. This one doesn't do that. It actually, mine doesn't make any noise when the self-timer is on. So I may set it up, hit the shutter button, run to place because I'm trying to take a self-portrait, and I'm looking at it. The only thing to indicate the self-timer is working is this red light is going to blink 10 times. But if I'm far enough away and I can't see that red light, I don't actually know if the self-timer is working or not. So I'll be looking at it, hoping that it works. And the only way I'll know if it's working is if I stand still for 10 seconds and then I hear the sound of the mirror and the shutter opening. But otherwise, you know, I may take a step closer to inspect if the self-timer is on, and then the camera goes off, and then I just wasted a frame. Very annoying that I don't know when the self-timer is actually running. Again, that could just be an issue with my camera. In some of my research, it said it's supposed to beep, but no beeps for me. Oh, and okay, one last one. This one doesn't really matter, but it doesn't have a depth of field preview button. I never use it on any of my other cameras that do have it, so I'm gonna let that one slide. My final thoughts on this camera are that it is lightweight, it is reliable, it is easy to shoot, and it produces really great images. So it definitely has a lot of drawbacks, a lot of like sort of nitpicky things that I would change, but overall I really love shooting this camera. It's actually one of the ones that I gravitate to the most, and that's because the pros far outweigh the cons for me. The cons are genuinely just nuisances and annoyances, but they never really hinder the shooting experience. So I definitely recommend this to anyone just starting out. It's a great beginner camera, very easy to load, very easy to use, especially if you just leave it in aperture priority mode the whole time. Put a couple batteries in there, make sure to turn it off after you use it, and just be diligent about that, and then you'll be good to go. This camera is wonderful, and I definitely recommend it to any beginners out there. I want to leave this off with looking at some photos that I've taken with this camera, so you can sort of get a sense of what this thing can do and get a look at that awesome light meter that it has inside of it. Yeah, so without further ado, here are a bunch of photos that I've taken on the Minolta XG7. And with that, I'll see you all next time.